Welcome to this week's episode of the Compliance Digest, presenting topics on all things compliance related. With me this week, I have Michael Kirk. Michael, welcome.
Thank you.
This week, we're going to be discussing 8 ways to improve compliance, communication, and training. This is a topic that we covered in the weekly digest, which went out earlier this week. We want to drill down into all 8 of the points and then see how we can apply those to your compliance program, specifically as we're going into the end of the year. A lot of compliance firms are either wrapping that program up or they're starting to look at ways to complete different facets of that program, being firm element or annual compliance meetings. So starting off, we have number 1, have a plan. Although this may seem like a simple task, it's actually a very important task. What we typically call this in a compliance lifeline is a WSP, or the Written Supervisory Procedures. Let's just go to the importance of having a plan. What does that mean for a compliance program?
It's no different than the way that the advisors run their practice when they're dealing with their client. Understand who the client is, understand what your goals are, what would you like to accomplish, how would you like to run your program for this year. You don't want to, of course, cover topics like when would I like to accomplish these things, what are changes that I'd like to do from last year, and what are obviously things that I can do to improve it from last year.
Yeah, absolutely. It's important to keep track of your plans from year to year to make sure that you're not only hitting everything that you need to, but you're also improving upon the plan that you had in place last year. Drilling in a little bit deeper, number 2, they talked about understanding your business. And then one of the key points that I pulled out from this was not having a one-size-fits-all approach. Do you want to go into that a little bit further?
Yes, I think a real easy way to understand this is it's very similar to the know your customer role. For compliance departments, their customers are their reps, essentially. Understand what type of business lines they're in, what type of products they're working with, and how this might be different from year-over-year type bases, and really how can we address that?
Absolutely, and we see this very often is that a lot of time when companies are going out and bidding their firm element program, they're often looking for, or what they end up with getting is a cookie cutter approach, and that's just the off-the-shelf item. You can't do that anymore. You got to do some due diligence. You got to find out the type of courses they offer, the type of programs they offer, the type of reporting that's available. So there's a lot of factors to take into account when you're looking at a firm element program based on your own business needs. The third point that they brought up was engage with the business. And this basically means regularly engaging with the employees themselves, since that's basically the makeup of the business. What else did you pull from this one?
Certainly talking to other people out on the floor. Definitely where the rubber meets the road is where you want to focus on, whether it's your sales team or whether it's your auditors or whether it's with various levels of the executive committee. But having conversation and communicating with them, taking good notes, and digesting that information before you implement a good plan is always helpful.
Yeah, and we always saw a formalized version of that being the needs analysis survey. Essentially, there's 2 different ways you can do that. A lot of firms choose to do that on a firm-wide basis, in which case usually the compliance officer will fill that out. And then if you really want to get a good feel for the type of program that you ran last year, a lot of companies will offer this either at the end of the year or before they launch their program for the upcoming year, and then they'll survey their current representatives on what they thought about the last year's program. Needs analysis is always really a revealing way of tapping into what they thought of the courses, the content, the length, and basically the overall feel of how the program went last year.
Yes, and of course it covers the level of what the firm needs and also what the reps might need as well. So you can cover it from both angles.
Absolutely, absolutely. The fourth point that they brought up was looking into the mirror. So it's important to be out there for your reps, but it's also important to make an assessment of your own program that you've decided to roll out. How credible and respected is the compliance department, especially when you're looking at your reps out there? What do they think about the compliance department? What are their thoughts on the program?
Definitely some of the harder questions to ask because we might be afraid of what those answers may be. But of course, this is very similar to what we are used to called needs analysis. And of course, we've broken down the needs analysis process to both levels, a needs analysis for the firm and also for each rep. The rep obviously will give us feedback that we certainly can use to build the best program possible.
Absolutely. The other thing that they brought up in this article was trust and transparency. Building trust with your employees, with your reps, obviously important, but then being honest with them is the other thing. If you're going through a major restructuring or there's a big change going through your organization, you got to let them know. Or if there's going to be changes for a compliance perspective to the program that you're running this year, it's important to communicate that clearly with your rep population and send out reminders letting them know along the way where they're at and then what they can look forward to as far as completion, just so they have a better understanding of what the perimeters of the program are.
Mm-hmm.
Another point that they brought up was to make the compliance interesting, relevant, and useful. So this speaks completely to having a practical program. So it's important that we make the check boxes, we hit every point on the compliance spectrum, but we also have to make sure that the content means something to the reps, otherwise you're not going to get anything from it. I think a lot of times what we've seen is programs of the past that it's been different. A lot of people went generic. Now we're seeing a change. What is that change?
Certainly the world has made several movements. The market's changed, the environment's changed. We are dealing with training, and I think people are demanding that the content that they see is more interesting, and then it's more attainable and more able to be put to use in a knowledgeable fashion. So the more that we can make it interesting and relevant is really just the more that a program can be successful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one of the things that we always have said is content is king, especially when it comes to firm element courses. We're seeing this time and time again that by having a catalog that's constantly evolving to meet the needs of the industry, that's constantly being audited and updated, not only from a tax code basis, but if you're looking at just industry trends, the same advice that was practical and genuinely helpful last year is completely different from the advice that we give out this year.
Mm-hmm.
The sixth point that they brought up was thinking globally. Now, when I first saw this in the chart, I thought of an actual globe. I thought international. But Mike had a different perspective, and I thought it was a little bit more interesting to share with the group.
Yes, when I think global, I think technology. Obviously, the internet has changed the way that we conduct business, and a firm today can create a presence to match that of any large behemoth that's out there. Definitely, technology allows us to be scalable and to launch a program in ways that we couldn't in the past.
Yeah, that's true. And after you brought that up, I thought that there was really good examples out there of basically if you can get a Cadillac-sized program at not Cadillac-sized prices. So what we're seeing now is that a lot of the technology that these large firms are using is being, a lot of the small firms are getting to utilize too, so it just means better programs all around. Another point they brought up was get others involved. So compliance departments, oftentimes we hear are understaffed. They don't have enough resources. Maybe they don't have the technology or the time to get basically everything they need to get done in 1 year. So one of the things that they recommended is to do a top-down approach, is getting some of the leadership involved in the company, getting their buy-in, and getting their endorsement when rolling out a compliance program, or certainly when getting into the end of the year when wrapping it up. What are some tips for getting others involved?
I think the word committee comes to mind, and having a diverse type of committee is always helpful. Never exclude someone from being involved in your committee process who you think may not have any relevance to compliance or even the securities industry, because ultimately they may unturn something that you were overlooking, and by addressing that concern or gaining their knowledge or insight, you're only going to make your program more effective and more deliverable.
That's true. I think, and one of the other things you brought up that was interesting to me was the idea of these roundtables, compliance roundtables, which oftentimes are closed off to regulators, so you don't necessarily have to worry about that influence. You can be more candid when you're amongst your peers. And what we've seen is that a lot of our clients who attend these roundtables always come back with great information, whether that be trends that are going on from a compliance perspective, what's going on from a regulator perspective, and it really helps them to fine-tune their program and make the necessary changes and enhancements that they have to have a better program year after year. The last point they had on this list was say what you mean and mean what you say. While the goal of the compliance department is not to find ways to punish employees, I think oftentimes a lot of people see that, and there's certainly a negative reputation that compliance has within the industry from salespeople. And depending on who you talk to, it's well-deserved, it's not well-deserved, but the important thing is that you're trusted by the people that you're rolling these programs out to, that you're giving these orders out to. And what are some tips that you have for making sure you live up to those expectations?
Certainly practice what you preach. Obviously, we implement things. People would like to see deadlines for those implementations, and they'd also like to see the action follow through, and it starts from the top and it will trickle its way down to the bottom. It's the beginning of how you create an outstanding culture.
These are good tips to help apply to make sure you get through as compliantly as possible. So that'll cover it for this week. Next week, we're going to do an update on the NSCP conference out in Washington, D.C. Again, my name is Alex Krinke. Thank you for joining me, Mike.
You're welcome.
Thank you.